Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&As. So let's go ahead and get this started. Alright, first question. What's harder on your nervous system and harder to recover from? 30 minutes of cardio including HIIT 3 times a week or lifting 3 times a week? People always seem to have some major confusion here, and I think when it comes to the nervous system, they have not looked at the research. The whole idea of heavy lifting being fatiguing to the central nervous system is an actual powerlifter and bodybuilding myth. It's not actually based on the science. Research shows that cardio is actually harder on your CNS than lifting is. And when it's been tested and looked at, a 1 rep max squat and a 1 rep max deadlift actually has almost zero, no significant measurable CNS fatigue. Failing a max deadlift doesn't even cause it. But what they found is that doing like 30 sets of curls actually has quite a bit of CNS fatigue. And what they found causes the most would be long endurance sessions because you're moving over and over and over and over and over, right? There are thousands of repetitions involved in taking a run. It's only one real repetition involved using in your nervous system involvement in doing a heavy deadlift, right? It's very, very little activity. I think what you need to understand, though, is that from a recovery you're talking about, outside of that, let's set that aside. What is recovery going to be? It's recovery to your muscle tissue, your bones, your tendons. A really heavy lifting session, your bones have to recover from. Okay? Your whole structure has to recover from it. A lot of the smaller support muscles get really fatigued doing something like a heavy deadlift or a heavy squat. But a lot of that is bone and everything else. We get microfractures in our bones. Now, that's a good thing because we know that the heavier you lift, heavier lifting versus lighter lifting causes better improvements in bone density, but your bones do have to recover from training. So we have to think of recovery in terms of individual tissues, right? Your bicep has to recover, the bicep tendon has to recover. So recovery is relative, isn't it? Right? Recovery is relative. Very relative. And you have to think in terms of are these things causing different training responses that are interfering with each other's recovery resources. Okay? So you've got to put it in that perspective. So the sort of question like this is so nuanced and so detailed that to really ask a question of which is harder to recover from, well, it's harder for what part of your body to recover from. I would say definitely a long cardio session, not 30 minutes of cardio, but I mean a 4-hour cardio session, like a long 4-hour jog, that would be a hell of a lot harder to recover from than a 45-minute intense squat and deadlift session. But it's all relative, isn't it? It's all relative. Because there are certainly people who train heavy every day. I train heavy 7 days a week most of the time right now, with a pretty high amount of volume after. I have to do a lot to recover from that. But someone who's an endurance athlete has just as hard of stuff to recover from, don't they? So here's what I'm going to say. How hard something is to recover from is going to depend on how hard you push it overall. How much total work you're putting into that specific endeavor. Are you pushing that endeavor to the bleeding edge? I'm pushing my training pretty much to the bleeding edge of my recovery, my lifting. But there are endurance athletes who push that to the bleeding edge. Just how hard do you go? That's ultimately what matters. How much work are you putting in? Rather than the individual type of exercise, you need to think in terms of total work that you've done relative to your capacity. So it's going to determine how hard something is to recover from. All right, next question. Hey coach, what are the pros and cons of good mornings and Romanian deadlifts? I can't decide which one I should do. I generally prescribe good mornings. They're more versatile. Now, as far as the pros and cons, what are the pros of the Romanian deadlift? Because essentially they're the same movement at a certain point, right? A good morning and a Romanian deadlift are almost the exact same movement pattern. They're a hip hinge with a controlled eccentric in which you get a stretch reflex in the hamstrings at the bottom, and you come back up. So pretty much from the rib cage down, they're the same movement. Your body can't really tell them apart significantly. We get to upper back, traps, arms, that's where they vary. Okay, so what does the Romanian deadlift have as an advantage? It works your grip, and it works your traps a little more. It works your grip and it works your traps a little more. For a person with a weak grip, Romanian deadlifts, if you don't want to add other supplemental grip work, could be a good addition to your training. Okay, it could be a good addition to your training if you need a good erector and hamstring stretch reflex movement and everything else. Basically an erector and hamstring hypertrophy tool. That's where they both fall into. But you have a high priority towards maybe grip, need grip training and need more traps, things like that. Okay, it makes sense. So a lot of times guys are going to say, that must be the best choice then, right? Because I want those things. I don't do that. I do shrugs for those others. Good mornings. What's the advantage? Good mornings are way easier to recover from. Way easier to recover from. Think in terms of relative strength of how much weight you have to do on a Romanian deadlift versus a good morning, you get the same training response. All right. I do usually sets of 10 with 205 on a good morning. Those are close to what I can handle. If I go heavier, my forearm could start breaking down, and I can get pretty much challenging limit sets with that. Okay, they're challenging. I would need to do at least 315 with a Romanian deadlift to get the same stress because the bar is higher up on a good morning. So much higher up your back, a lighter weight creates that same tension further down. You have to think in terms of moment arms. Okay? Because it's up on your back where you would put a squat bar versus being further down as far as the torque on the low back and hamstrings and everything. You have less weight sitting up on top of your back for these long high volume sets. You can do more volume with a good morning. So if your goal was to maximize erector and hamstring hypertrophy, which is my goal for doing them, good morning can handle more weekly volume, and in my case that ends up being about 15 sets a week. Okay? I personally do about 15 sets of good mornings every single week right now, and that's a lot, but I can recover from it. May not be able to recover from 15 sets of Romanian deadlifts. Right? So I choose to use another exercise for grip and traps. So it's a matter of how you balance your program. So you're asking, can't decide which one to do. Well, you need to step back and assess training volume, training needs, weak points. In my case, I use a good morning and just use a shrug for what I would get out of a Romanian deadlift. Maybe you've got a tighter time frame. Maybe you don't have as much gym time. Someone with very limited gym time who needs a good hamstring and erector exercise, but needs the extra grip and trap training, and maybe they don't have time to do as many sets of good mornings anyways, and throw shrugs in on top of it. Right? The Romanian makes sense. In terms of exercise economy, that might be a better choice, even if some total results from total training volume of exercises would be slightly less. So that might be your choice there. It's a matter of time and recovery resources. So that's how you should decide. Hopefully that makes sense. And neither one is the right or wrong choice. It depends upon your situation. They're both good tools. All right, next question. I've had knee pain in both knees for like a year and a half now, and it comes and goes. It's right above the kneecap, so I think it might be the tendon. I work as a carpenter, so it has never gotten time to heal. It happened when I was squatting, and I can't really squat anymore without pain, though. I can still deadlift without issues. How would you fix this? You know, when we're dealing with things like that, I'm not a physical therapist. But if you were to come to me, say, as a client, if I had a client, for example, who has been having that knee pain and they've hired me to be their strength coach, and I have to find a way to train them around this tendon pain. Because if you can still deadlift, your knee is probably not damaged. You definitely have a possible tendon issue there, or something is happening. I might obviously tell you to go see a physical therapist also to have them look at it. But I would say, okay, well, we would do box squats. Box squats are the easiest form of squat on the knee when performed correctly. And I don't mean when people do them incorrectly. I'm talking about a correctly performed box squat in which the knee stays behind the toe and you sit back to a box just below parallel. Okay, I would try box squats and say, how does that feel? Right? Does that feel any better? Now, normally if we've got real knee damage or real concerns for knee stability, we would do a lot of hamstring work, which you should do anyways. But if you're feeling it up near the top like that, and it's again, possibly the tendon, we might look into doing some really high rep band type stuff for your quads, right? Hooking bands around down the bottom of a bench and just doing some knee extensions for very, very high reps, like you think of as a leg extension, but just very high reps with a band, a light band, to see if we can get some blood flow to that tendon. Because a lot of times blood flow to a tendon can help with inflammation as long as we're not putting so much stress on it that we're loading it heavy. And I find really high rep band work on some exercises help with those things, like people who need more blood flow to their low back. If you've had some low back issues, we can help get blood flow to those tendons and things. So that would be something you could look into as well. So maybe a combination of those things, and try box squatting and learn to box squat correctly, not a half-ass box squat. Do it correctly, and it may help your issue. Failing that, because again, you're talking about being a carpenter, you may not have amazing insurance. I don't know what country you live in. Going to see a physical therapist may become an option. If those things don't resolve it, you might need to just break off and see a physical therapist at a certain point, if you can afford it. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.